My husband staged a robbery to steal my grandmother's diamonds. He didn't know I was tracking them on my phone. The notification lit up my screen at exactly 9:42 p.m. Asset located. I stared at the blue dot pulsing on the map, then looked across the table at Richard. He was currently gripping the waiter's arm, crying actual tears, telling anyone within earshot that our house had been violated. For a man who couldn't remember to put the toilet seat down, he was pulling off the performance of a lifetime. But he didn't know about the micro GPS tile I'd sewn into the lining of the jewelry box 3 months ago. Richard was a consultant. I never figured out what he consulted on, but 6 months ago things started missing. A silver picture frame. A watch. So I bought trackers. I put one in the velvet box that held my grandmother's emerald necklace. It was appraised at $180,000. It was my safety net, and I knew eventually he would come for it. Tonight was the night. Dinner was excruciating. Then his phone rang. He listened for 3 seconds and dropped his fork. The clatter echoed through the restaurant. "Oh my God," he whispered. "The security company. Someone broke in." The drive home was a masterclass in gaslighting. He kept apologizing for a crime that hadn't even been fully discovered yet. When we pulled into the driveway, the police were already there. 2 cruisers, lights flashing. My heart skipped a beat. He'd actually called the police. This wasn't just a betrayal, this was a felony. We walked into the master bedroom. It looked like a tornado had hit. The window was shattered, and there, sitting empty on the dresser, was the velvet box. "My necklace," I whispered. The officer, Deputy Miller, was taking notes. "Looks like a smash and grab," Miller said. They knew exactly where to go. Richard slumped onto the bed. "It's worth nearly 200 grand, officer. You have to find it." "We'll do our best, sir," Miller said. "But it's probably halfway to the city by now." Richard looked up, and I saw it. The relief. The flash of triumph. "I need to call the insurance company," Richard said. "I increased the policy last month just in case." And there it was, the motive, double-dipping. He was going to cash a check for $180,000 and keep the diamonds. "I'm going to get some water," I said. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I pulled out my phone. 1:42 p.m. Location 1422 Oakwood Drive. It wasn't a pawn shop. It was a residential address. A nice little townhouse about 4 miles away. My phone offered a helpful suggestion. Address associated with contact. Mark. Accountant. Richard didn't have an accountant named Mark, but I had seen that name pop up on his phone for months. The necklace wasn't stolen, it was delivered. I unlocked the bathroom door. Richard was deep in conversation with Deputy Miller. "Richard?" I said softly. "I think I need some fresh air." "Of course not. Take your time." I walked out the back door. I didn't cry. I opened the Uber app, because while Richard was busy filing a police report that would send him to prison, I had an errand to run. I wasn't just going to get my necklace back. I was going to see exactly who Richard thought was worth destroying our life for. Before we move on to what I found behind that turquoise door, if you've ever had a gut feeling that someone was lying to you, hit that subscribe button. The car pulled up. I got in. "Where to?" the driver asked. 1422 Oakwood Drive, I said. "And please, hurry. Sarah is on her way to confront the person holding her stolen diamonds. But who is Mark Accountant? And is Sarah walking into a trap? Hit like and subscribe for part 2 to see who opens the door." I was looking at my husband's mistress through the window. She was wearing his t-shirt, drinking my wine, and wearing my stolen necklace. The turquoise door stared back at me like an accusation. It was cheerful, bright, and completely out of place for a house holding stolen property. My Uber driver, a guy named Khalid, cleared his throat. "Miss, is this the place? It looks quiet." I looked at the townhouse. It screamed young professional or divorced dad trying too hard. "This is it," I said, gripping my phone. "Can you wait for me?" "Just for 5 minutes. I'll pay double for the waiting time." Khalid nodded. "I'll wait right here," he said. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The night air was cool, but I was burning up. Adrenaline makes your hands shake, but your vision crystal clear. I walked up the driveway, avoiding the motion sensor lights. 1422 Oakwood Drive. The tracker on my phone was a solid, unmoving blue dot right inside. The asset was here. My grandmother's legacy was behind that cheerful door. I didn't ring the bell. Confrontation is for amateurs. Observation is for professionals. I crept around the side of the unit. The blinds in the front window were drawn tight, but there was a sliver of light spilling out from a side window. I stepped into the mulch, ruining my heels, and pressed my back against the siding. I took a deep breath. Then, I peeked through the gap in the curtains. The room inside was modern. West Elm furniture, abstract art, and there, sitting on a beige sectional sofa with a glass of red wine in her hand, was Mark. Except Mark wasn't an accountant. Mark was a woman, and I recognized her. Tiffany, the event coordinator Richard had hired for his firm's holiday party last year. She was young, maybe 26. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, a Yale t-shirt. I froze. That was Richard's t-shirt. Seeing it on her was like a physical slap. It was intimate. It wasn't just an affair, they were playing house. But then I saw it. On the coffee table, right next to her wine glass, sat the blue velvet box. It was open. My grandmother's emerald necklace was draped over her fingers. She was holding it up to the light, admiring the sparkle. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was the beneficiary. Richard hadn't just faked a robbery for the insurance money, he'd done it to give her the one thing I refused to let him sell. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it. He staged a felony just to regift my property to his mistress. It was so pathetic, it was almost funny. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. Police reports are messy. I needed undeniable, hard proof. I switched to camera mode, zoomed in, and snapped 3 photos. Click. Tiffany holding the necklace. Click. Tiffany wearing Richard's shirt. Click. The address number visible near the front door. I had the smoking gun, but as I stared at the photo, a thought struck me. Richard was still at home with the police, spinning a tale about a violent break-in. If I called the cops now, they would find the stolen goods. Richard would be arrested for theft. But then I paused. If Richard went to jail tonight, the assets would be frozen. I'd be the wife of the felon. I wouldn't get what I deserved. Richard wanted to play games? Fine, I could write a better script. I wasn't going to bust them tonight. I was going to let Richard file that fraudulent insurance claim. I was going to let him commit the crime on paper. Because attempted fraud is bad, but completed wire fraud and insurance fraud, that's federal. That's leverage. I lowered the phone. I walked back to the Uber. "Everything okay, miss?" Khalid asked. "Better than okay, Khalid," I said. "Take me back to the scene of the crime. My husband is probably wondering where I am." You found what you were looking for?" "Oh, I found a lot more than that." The ride back was silent. As we pulled into my neighborhood, the police lights were still flashing. A detective's unmarked sedan had arrived. Perfect. "Drop me at the corner," I told Khalid. "I need to walk up. It looks better." I got out and started running toward my house. I forced tears into my eyes. I let my breath hitch. I ran past the police tape, straight toward the front door where Richard was standing with the detective. "Richard!" I screamed, my voice cracking perfectly. "Richard, I was so scared!" He looked up, relief washing over his face. "Sarah, where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick!" I had to drive. I sobbed, throwing my arms around him. I could smell his cologne, the same cologne lingering on a Yale t-shirt 4 miles away. I couldn't breathe in the house. I just drove around. "I'm so sorry." He hugged me back. "It's okay. You're safe." Over his shoulder, I made eye contact with the detective. "Mrs. Conway?" the detective asked. "I'm Detective Miller. We need to ask you a few questions about the missing items." Of course, I sniffled. "I'll tell you everything I know." Richard put a protective hand on my back. "She's shaken up, detective. Go easy on her." "I'm fine, Richard," I said, looking at him with wide, trusting eyes. "I just want to help find whoever did this." I watched Richard relax. He bought it. He thought he was in control. But as we walked into the kitchen, I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. Richard had started a game of chess, thinking he was playing against a pigeon. He had no idea he was sitting across from a grandmaster. So the detective said, "Let's start with the necklace. Can you describe it?" "Oh, I can do better than that," Richard interjected. "I have the appraisal right here." "Actually," I said, Interrupting him, my voice was steady now. I noticed something strange before we left for dinner, Richard. Did you notice the back gate was unlatched? Richard froze. The back gate? Yes. I thought I saw it open when I took the trash out this afternoon. I didn't think anything of it, but maybe they were watching us? I was feeding him a false lead. I wanted him to commit to a story that I could later disprove. Richard jumped on the bait. Yes! Now that you mention it, I think I saw a van parked down the street yesterday. A white van. They must have been casing the place. The detective wrote it down. A white van. Okay. I looked down to hide my smile. There was no van. Our security cameras, the ones Richard thought were offline, would prove that. He was lying to a detective, on record. If you're rooting for Sarah to take him for everything he's worth, hit that like button right now. The detective closed his notebook. We'll be in touch. Contact your insurance provider. First thing in the morning, Richard promised. As the police left, the house fell silent. Richard poured himself a scotch. What a nightmare, he sighed. But at least you're okay, Sarah. I'm okay, I repeated. I'm going to bed. I'll join you in a bit. I need to decompress. I knew what that meant. He needed to call Tiffany. I walked upstairs to the guest room and closed the door. I pulled out my laptop. I logged into our shared cell phone account and downloaded his call logs. Then I logged into the home security cloud, and there it was. At 7:15 p.m., a figure walked up to the back door and punched in Richard's code. A female figure. Tiffany. She walked in, stayed for 10 minutes, and walked out with a tote bag containing my necklace and a bottle of wine. There was no break-in. She walked right in. I had him. But I wasn't done. Because in those call logs, I saw something interesting. Richard wasn't just calling Tiffany, he was calling a number in the city. A number associated with a very exclusive jewelry broker. Richard wasn't planning to let Tiffany keep that necklace. He was letting her hold it for now to keep her happy, but he was already making arrangements to sell it once the insurance check cleared. He was conning his wife and his mistress at the same time. Oh, this was going to be fun. Sarah has the evidence to send her husband to prison, but can she turn the mistress against him before he sells the necklace? Hit like and subscribe for part 3 to see the trap snap shut. Richard wasn't just stealing from me, he was laundering money through my 10-year-old son's identity. The game just changed. It was 10 a.m. Mr. Vance from Puritan Insurance sat in our living room. He looked exactly like bad news. You stated the alarm was set at 7:00 p.m.? Vance asked. Absolutely, Richard lied. Vance paused. The log shows no exit signal until the police arrived. Richard paled. Technology glitch? Vance turned to me. Mrs. Conway, did you see your husband set the alarm? I leaned forward. Honey, didn't you say the keypad beeped funny last week? Richard grabbed the lifeline. Right. It was making an odd chirping sound. Vance wrote equipment failure down. Convenient. Richard collapsed onto the sofa as soon as Vance left. I need a drink. I have errands to run, I said. I drove straight to the Diamond District. Based on Richard's call logs, he had called Goldman & Sons Estate Jewelry 4 times. I walked into the shop. My husband called you about a Harry Winston emerald necklace, I said. The jeweler hesitated. I told him I need to see it in person. He said he'd bring it in next week. Next week? Boom. Richard wasn't letting Tiffany keep that necklace. He was letting her babysit it until the insurance claim was approved, then snatching it back to sell for cash. He was conning everyone. I walked out and pulled out my phone. I opened a burner app and typed a message to Tiffany. Careful with the necklace. The clasp is loose. Wouldn't want you to lose it before Richard sells it next week. Send. That was the grenade. If you were in my shoes, would you warn the mistress she's being played? Tell me in the comments. I hailed a cab to see my old college roommate, Jessica. She was a forensic accountant for the FBI. Jessica ran a deep dive on Richard's shell companies. Suddenly, she turned her screen toward me. Hey, Sarah, look at this. He's been siphoning money from your joint savings. But it's not going to Tiffany. It's going to an offshore account in the Caymans. Whose name is it in? Jessica looked pale. It's in your son's name? He opened it using your son's social security number. The air left the room. My son. Richard wasn't just stealing, he was framing our child. Print it, I said. Print everything. I walked out of the building. I checked my phone. Asset moving. Location. leaving 1422 Oakwood Drive. Tiffany was on the move, and judging by the direction, she was coming to my house. Perfect. I was about to host the dinner party from hell. Sarah is heading home to confront her husband with the FBI files, but the mistress is also on her way, and she thinks she owns the place. Hit like and subscribe for the explosive finale. The headlights swept across the living room wall like searchlights from a prison guard tower. 9:15 p.m. I was sitting in the wingback chair sipping tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Richard was pacing the rug wearing a track in the expensive wool weave. He stopped when the lights hit the window. "Who is that?" he hissed, freezing like a deer caught in the crosshairs. "Did you order food?" "I didn't order anything," I said calmly, "but I think your problem has arrived." Before he could ask what I meant, the pounding started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a rhythmic, frantic hammering on the solid oak front door. Bam, bam, bam. "Richard! I know you're in there! Open the damn door!" Richard's face went from pale to a shade of gray usually reserved for corpses. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's her. Why is she here? She's not supposed to be here. Sarah, go upstairs. Please, just go upstairs. I'll handle this. It's a work thing. A disgruntled client." "A disgruntled client calling you by your first name at 9 on a Tuesday?" I raised an eyebrow. "She sounds upset. Maybe we should let her in before she wakes the neighbors. You know how Mrs. Gable loves to call the HOA? "No!" Richard lunged toward the door, not to open it, but to hold it shut. "Don't open it!" Too late. I was already up. I walked past him, ignoring his outstretched hand. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. The door flew open, pushed by the force of a woman scorned. Tiffany stumbled in, breathless, her mascara smudged, clutching a designer tote bag to her chest like a life preserver. She looked at me, then at Richard, her eyes blazing with manic energy. "You liar!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Richard. "You absolute liar!" "Tiffany, keep your voice down," Richard hissed, trying to shut the door behind her while glancing nervously at the street. "What are you doing here? Are you insane?" "Am I insane?" She laughed, a high-pitched, jagged sound. "You told me to keep it safe. You told me we were going to wait for the insurance money. And then I find out you're planning to sell it next week behind my back?" Richard looked confused. "What? Sell what?" "I never said, don't play dumb." She dug into her bag. "I got the text. Careful with the clasp. Wouldn't want to lose it before I sell it next week. Someone warned me, Richard. Someone knows." She pulled her hand out of the bag. And there it was. The Harry Winston necklace. The sunlight of my grandmother's legacy, dangling from the hand of a 26-year-old event planner standing in my foyer. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Richard stared at the necklace. Then he stared at me. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to figure out who sent the text. But he couldn't process it fast enough. "Put that away!" Richard shrieked, lunging for her. "Are you trying to get us arrested? The police were just here." Tiffany stepped back, holding the diamonds out of his reach. "No, I want answers. You promised me we'd split the insurance money and go to Cabo. Now I hear you're cashing out and dumping me?" I cleared my throat, a polite hostess sound. Both of them turned to look at me. In the chaos, they had almost forgotten I was there. The wife, the victim, the furniture. So I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Let me get this straight. Richard faked a robbery last night, shattered our bedroom window, terrified me, and filed a police report, all to give my grandmother's heirloom to you?" I looked at Tiffany. "And you brought the stolen evidence back to the crime scene because you got a text message?" Tiffany blinked. She looked at the necklace in her hand, then at me. The realization of what she had just done, walked into the victim's house with the stolen goods, started to dawn on her. Tiffany stammered. He told me it was his grandmother's. He said you guys were separated. He said the divorce was final." "Oh, honey," I said, stepping closer. "We had dinner at Le Jardin last night. Does that look like a divorce to you?" Tiffany turned on Richard, her face twisting in rage. "You told me she was crazy. You told me she lived in the guest room." "Shut up!" Richard roared. "Both of you, just shut up!" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing frantically. Okay, we can fix this. Tiffany, give me the necklace. Sarah, he turned to me, his eyes pleading. Sarah, baby, listen. I was in debt, deep debt. The business, it's not doing well. I did this for us. I needed the liquidity. I was going to pay off the house, I swear. You were going to pay off the house by committing a felony and sleeping with your event planner? I asked. Interesting financial strategy. I can explain everything, Richard begged. Just, Tiffany, give me the necklace. Sarah, don't call the police. If you call the police, I go to jail and you get nothing. The assets get frozen, the house gets seized. You know how this works. He was right, and he knew it. He was banking on my greed, outweighing my anger. He's right, Sarah, Richard said, seeing my hesitation. We're in this together now. You didn't report it when you figured it out. You're an accessory. Am I? I walked over to the side table and picked up the file folder I brought home from Jessica's office. I don't think I'm an accessory, Richard. I think I'm a concerned mother. What is that? Richard asked, eyeing the folder. I opened it. This is a bank statement from the Cayman Islands, account number 8842. Richard stopped breathing. Literally stopped. His face went slack. I don't know what that is, he whispered. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my voice finally rising. You opened this account using our son's social security number. You've been funneling cash into it for 3 years. Money stolen from our joint accounts? Money laundered through shell companies? Tiffany looked between us, confused. What is she talking about? He's using our 10-year-old son as a shield for his money laundering, I told her, not taking my eyes off Richard. And do you know what the feds do when they find out? They don't just arrest the father. They freeze everything associated with the family. My son's college fund, his future. All of it tainted because you are a coward. Richard collapsed onto the stairs. He looked defeated. I had to, he mumbled. The loan sharks, they were going to hurt me. Sharks? Tiffany squeaked. You told me you were an investor. He lied. Tiffany, I said. That's what he does. He lies to you about the divorce, he lies to the police about the robbery, and he lies to the IRS about his income. And right now, he's about 5 minutes away from losing everything. I walked over to Tiffany. I held out my hand. Give it to me, I said. Tiffany hesitated. She clutched the necklace tighter. No, it's my insurance policy. If I go down, he goes down. If you don't give it to me, I said calmly, I will call Detective Miller right now. I will tell him you broke in tonight. I will show him the footage of you entering the back gate with the code Richard gave you. I will frame you as the mastermind and Richard as the manipulated husband. And with your record, I don't think a judge will be very sympathetic. Tiffany's hand trembled. She looked at Richard, who was head and hands on the stairs, useless. Then she looked at me. The cold, hard reality of the situation hit her. She wasn't the girlfriend, she was the fall guy. She dropped the necklace into my hand. Smart girl, I said. Now get out. What? Get out of my house. Lose Richard's number. Forget you ever met us. If I see your face again, I hand over the security footage to the police. Tiffany didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her bag, shot one last look of pure hatred at Richard, and bolted out the door. I heard her car engine roar to life and tires screech as she peeled out of the driveway. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a battlefield after the shooting stops. I held the necklace up to the light. It was heavy, cold, beautiful. So Richard said from the stairs. His voice was hollow. You won. You got the necklace back. You know about the account. What now? You calling the cops? I walked over to the fireplace. I placed the necklace on the mantel, right next to our wedding photo. No, I said, I'm not calling the cops. Richard looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You aren't? No, because if I call the cops, you go to jail. And if you go to jail, you can't pay me. Pay you? We're going to renegotiate our marriage contract, Richard, I said, sitting down opposite him. And the terms are going to be very, very specific.
What do you want?
I want the house fully paid off. I want the Cayman account liquidated and transferred to a legitimate trust for our son. I want full custody. And I want you to continue working, continue consulting, continue earning, but every cent you make above minimum wage goes to me. You are going to be my indentured servant until you pay back every single dollar you stole, plus interest. Richard laughed, a dry, bitter sound. And if I say no? Then I mail this file to the FBI, I tap the folder, and I give Detective Miller the footage of Tiffany, and I show the insurance company the text messages. Richard stared at me. He realized, finally, who he was dealing with. He thought he married a trophy. He forgot that trophies are made of metal, hard, unyielding metal. "You can't be serious," he whispered. "That's slavery." "That's alimony, darling," I smiled, but with better oversight. Just then, there was another knock at the door. Richard jumped. "Is she back?" I frowned. It wasn't the frantic pounding of Tiffany. It was a solid, authoritative knock. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Detective Miller, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were two men in windbreakers that said FBI. My heart stopped. I hadn't called them. Jessica hadn't called them. "Dickie, did you call anyone?" He shook his head, eyes wide with terror. I opened the door. "Mrs. Conway," Detective Miller said, looking serious. "Sorry to disturb you again, but we picked up a young woman speeding out of your neighborhood. She was very agitated. She started talking about a robbery, a fake claim, and a necklace." He looked past me, straight at the mantel, straight at the Harry Winston necklace I had just placed there, the necklace that was supposed to be stolen. "Mind if we come in?" Miller asked. Richard made a sound like a dying balloon. I stood in the doorway, blocking their view, my mind racing. I had the leverage over Richard. I had the plan. But Tiffany, that idiot, that loose cannon, had cracked under a simple traffic stop. She had ratted us out. If they came in, they'd see the necklace. The game would be over. Richard would go to jail, but I'd lose my leverage. The assets would be seized by the government as proceeds of crime. I'd get nothing. I had to make a choice. Save Richard to enslave him later, or let him burn now and lose my payday. "Actually, Detective," I said, blocking the doorframe with my body, "there must be a misunderstanding. That woman, she's having a mental health crisis. She's been stalking my husband." Miller narrowed his eyes. "Mrs. Conway, she gave us details. Specifics about a necklace." "She's delusional," I said firmly. "My necklace is still missing." Miller stepped closer. "Then why did she say she just handed it to you?" Pause. If you think Sarah can talk her way out of the FBI standing on her porch, hit that like button. This is the moment where most people fold. Sarah isn't most people, because, I said, leaning in, she wanted to hurt us. "But Detective, you're welcome to search the house. However, I should warn you."
I was about to take the biggest gamble of my life.
"Warn me about what?" "My husband," I said, stepping aside and revealing Richard, who looked ready to vomit. "He has a confession to make." I looked at Richard. I mouthed one word: "Run." Just kidding. I didn't tell him to run. I looked at him and telepathically sent him a message. Take the fall for the insurance, or I give them the Cayman file. It was a split-second decision. Which crime was lesser? "Richard," I said, "tell the detective about the misunderstanding." Richard looked at the cops. He looked at me. He looked at the necklace on the mantel, visible now that I'd moved. "It wasn't stolen," Richard croaked. Miller crossed his arms. "Go on." "It was a prank," Richard said, his voice trembling. "An insurance misunderstanding." Miller pulled out handcuffs, but before he could step forward, one of the FBI agents spoke up. "We're not here for the necklace, Mr. Conway. We're here about the bank account in the Cayman Islands. We've been monitoring it for 6 months." My blood froze. Jessica didn't find the account because she was a genius. She found it because it was already flagged. They hadn't come because of Tiffany. They had been watching us the whole time. And I was standing in the living room with the target. If you want to see how Sarah navigates a federal raid without losing her manicure or her freedom, make sure you're subscribed. Next session, we go to court. And trust me, I'm not sitting in the defendant's chair. "Mrs. Conway," the agent said, turning to me, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. And since your name is on the joint tax returns, we're going to need you to come with us too." The handcuffs clicked. Not on Richard. On me. "Wait, what?" "You have the right to remain silent," the agent droned. I stared at Richard. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the floor. And for the first time in 15 years, I realized I wasn't the only one playing a long game. Richard hadn't just framed our son. He had framed me. Richard was signing a deal to testify against me. He didn't know I had the FBI on speed dial. I always thought handcuffs were a metaphor for marriage. Being bound to someone, restricted, legally tied together. Turns out the metal ones chafe a lot more. It was 11:30 p.m. when they processed me. Fingerprints, mugshot, surrender of personal effects, watching the officer put my grandmother's necklace, the one I had fought so hard to retrieve, into a plastic evidence bag was a special kind of torture. Richard was processed in the lane next to me. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the floor, his shoulders hunched, looking small and pathetic. But I knew better now. That pathetic posture was camouflage. Beneath the tweed jacket and the nervous sweat was a man who had been setting me up as his fall guy since the day he opened that Cayman account. They separated us immediately. I was led into interview room B. It was exactly like the movie's cinder block walls, a table that smelled of bleach and old coffee, and a two-way mirror that hummed with fluorescent electricity. My hands were uncuffed, but I felt heavier than ever. Agent Miller, the one who had arrested us, walked in. He was joined by a woman, Agent Rossi. She looked sharp, dangerous, and completely unimpressed by my suburban housewife aesthetic. "Comfortable, Mrs. Conway?" Rossi asked, dropping a thick file onto the table. The thud echoed in the small room. "I'd prefer my living room," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But since I'm here, maybe you can explain why I'm being treated like a criminal for recovering my own stolen property." "We're not interested in the necklace, Sarah," Miller said, sitting down opposite me. "We're interested in Blue Horizon Holdings." "I've never heard of it," I said. Rossi flipped the file open. She spun a document around so I could read it. It was an incorporation document for a limited liability company registered in Delaware with a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. "Look at the bottom of page 4, Rossi said. I looked, and my heart stopped. There, in blue ink, was my signature. Sarah J. Conway. It wasn't forged, it was my handwriting, my loop on the S, my Sharpie at the end. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. But even as I said it, a memory flashed in my brain. 3 years ago. The kitchen island. Richard rushing out the door. "Honey, I need you to sign these documents for Tyler's 529 college savings plan. The bank needs it today or we lose the interest rate." I had been making lunch. I had wiped my hands on a towel and signed 3 pages without reading the fine print because I trusted my husband. "You are listed as the primary beneficiary and managing director of Blue Horizon Holdings," Rossi said mercilessly. "This company has received $1.2 million in wire transfers over the last 36 months. Transfers that originated from fraudulent business loans, inflated invoices, and yes, siphoned funds from your husband's legitimate consulting firm." "He tricked me," I said, looking up at them. "He told me these were college fund papers." Miller leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's what they all say, Mrs. Conway. My husband did it. But here's the problem. The money from this account wasn't just sitting there. It was used to pay off your credit cards. It was used to pay for your lease on the Range Rover. It was used to pay for the remodel of your kitchen." "I thought that was his salary," I protested. "Ignorance isn't a defense when your signature is on the incorporation papers," Rossi said coldly. "Here is the reality. Richard is in the next room, and right now he's telling us that you were the mastermind. He's saying he was just the face of the business, but you managed the books. You were the legal assistant, right? You have a background in law. You know how to structure assets." The room spun. Richard was flipping on me. He was using my own resume against me. He knew I used to work in a law firm. He knew I handled the household finances. He was painting a picture where I was the Lady Macbeth, the greedy wife pushing her husband to steal. "He's lying," I said, my voice shaking. "He has a mistress. Tiffany. The money, he was planning to run away with her." "We know about Tiffany," Miller said dismissively. "We picked her up. She says she didn't know anything about the finances. She just thought he was rich. But you? You're the wife. You're on the tax returns. You're on the deeds. And you're on the shell company." Rossi leaned in close. "Richard is cutting a deal, Sarah. He's offering to testify against you in exchange for reduced time. He says you forced him to open those accounts. He says you threatened to leave him and take the kid if he didn't maintain your lifestyle." It was brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. He was using the demanding wife stereotype to save his own skin. "If he signs that plea deal," Miller said softly, "you're looking at 15 years. conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering. You'll miss Tyler's graduation. You'll miss his wedding. You'll die in a federal prison. I stared at the two-way mirror. I imagined Richard on the other side, probably crying fake tears, spinning his web. He thought he had won. He thought that by putting my name on the paper 3 years ago, he had checkmated me. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that I had a friend who didn't just read files, she wrote them. I want my phone call, I said. Rossi sighed. Call a lawyer, Sarah. You're going to need a good one. I don't want a lawyer, I said, sitting up straighter. I want to call Agent Jessica Reynolds, Forensic Accounting Division, New York Field Office. Miller and Rossi exchanged a look. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. They went from looking at a suburban housewife to looking at someone who knew the internal directory of the FBI. Jessica Reynolds? Rossi asked. You know her? She was my college roommate, I said. And she's the one who flagged the Cayman account, she's the one who printed the transaction history, and she's the one who has the metadata showing exactly which IP address accessed that account for the last 3 years. I leaned forward. See? Richard might have my signature. But he has something else too. He has an ego. He checked that account every single day. From his phone, from his office, from the Wi-Fi at Les Jardins. And Jessica has the logs. Miller stood up. Stay here. He walked out of the room quickly. Rossi stayed. She wasn't glaring anymore. She was studying me. If Reynolds flagged this, why didn't she tell us you were the signatory? Because she knows I didn't sign it knowingly, I said. And if you bring her in here, she'll walk you through the digital footprint. My signature is on the paper, yes. But the IP address that moved the money? That belongs to Richard. The login credentials? Recovered from Richard's laptop? The emails confirming the wire transfers? Sent to a hidden Proton Mail account that is linked to Richard's cell phone number. I took a deep breath. Richard thinks paper is proof. In 2024, paper is just a prop. Data is proof. And I have the data. The door opened. Miller came back in. He looked different. Less cocky. Agent Reynolds is on the line, he said. She's sending over a digital packet right now. He sat down. He looked at me with something resembling respect. She says Richard Conway is a sloppy amateur and that you've been collecting evidence for 48 hours. I have, I said. Now, here is what is going to happen. This is the part where the victim becomes the predator. If you're enjoying this turnaround, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to demand isn't just justice, it's total domination. I'm listening, Rossi said. Richard is trying to cut a deal to frame me, I said. I want to cut a deal to bury him. I will give you the necklace. It's evidence of insurance fraud. I will give you the recordings from my home security system proving he staged the break-in. I will give you the text messages where he admits to the debt, and I will testify that he coerced me into signing those documents under false pretenses. And in exchange, Miller asked. Immunity, I said. Complete and total immunity. I walk out of here tonight, no charges, no record, and... I paused. I want to be the one to tell him. Miller laughed nervously. You want to tell him what? I want 5 minutes in the room with him before you book him. I want him to know exactly who beat him. Miller looked at Rossi. Rossi shrugged. It's highly irregular. So is a housewife doing your job for you, I countered. Miller tapped his earpiece. He listened for a moment. Finally, he nodded. Immunity is on the table pending the verification of the digital packet, but we can't let you in the room alone with him. Liability. I don't need to be alone, I said. I just need him to see me walking out the front door while he's being walked into a cell. Miller stood up. Deal. An hour later, the paperwork was signed. Jessica had come through. The digital evidence was overwhelming. It showed Richard logging into the Blue Horizon account from his mistress's house, from his golf club, from everywhere except my iPad. It proved he had exclusive control. My signature was legally deemed fraud in the inducement. I was clear. They led me out of the interrogation room. They walked me down the hallway toward the exit. But they made a detour. They walked me past interview room A. The door was open. Richard was sitting there, looking smug, talking to a public defender. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought I was in the other room crying and confessing. He looked up as I walked by. Our eyes locked. He saw my uncuffed hands. He saw Agent Miller holding the door open for me. He saw the look on my face. Not fear, not sadness. Victory. His mouth opened. "Sarah?" I stopped. I turned to him. "You should have checked the IP logs, Richard," I said, my voice echoing in the hallway. "And you definitely should have read the fine print on who you married." "Wait!" Richard stood up, panic seizing him. "Where is she going? She signed the papers. She's the director." Agent Rossi stepped into his room, holding a pair of handcuffs. "Sit down, Mr. Conway. We have some new evidence to discuss regarding your digital footprint." "And your wife? She's the witness for the prosecution." "No!" Richard screamed as the door slammed shut. "No! Sarah!" I walked out of the police station into the cool night air. It was 3 a.m. I was exhausted. My makeup was ruined, my dress was wrinkled. I had no car, no husband, and my grandmother's necklace was in an evidence locker.
But I was free.
I stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. It smelled like rain and freedom. My phone buzzed. It was Jessica. Text, "You owe me a drink and a very expensive dinner." I typed back, "I owe you my life." I called an Uber. But as I waited, I realized something. The house. The house was still in both our names. The assets were going to be frozen by the feds in the morning. The bank accounts would be locked. I had immunity, but I was about to be homeless and broke. The government doesn't care if you're the innocent wife. If the house was paid for with dirty money, they take the house. Asset forfeiture laws are brutal. I had about 4 hours before the sun came up and the seizure order was executed. I needed to get back to the house, not to sleep, but because there was one thing Richard had hidden that the FBI didn't know about, one thing that wasn't digital, one thing he had mentioned in his sleep years ago, a rainy day fund that wasn't in a bank. He kept a safe, not the one in the master bedroom that was empty, a floor safe, under the loose floorboard in the garage. If the feds got there first, they'd find it. If I got there first, well, a woman has to eat. I saw the headlights of the Uber approaching. The game wasn't over. It had just moved to sudden death overtime. I got in the car, 1422. No, wait, I corrected myself. Take me home and drive fast. I had to rob my own house before the government did. Sarah beat the charges, but the government is coming for her house. Can she get to the hidden safe before the asset forfeiture team arrives? Hit like and subscribe for the thrilling finale. I had 4 hours to rob my own house before the U.S. Marshals seized everything. I didn't know Richard had left me one last surprise. There is a specific sound a house makes right before the federal government seizes it. It's a heavy, suffocating silence. It was 4:15 a.m. when the Uber dropped me a block away. I wasn't Sarah Conway anymore. I was a ghost coming back to haunt the ruins of her own life. My immunity deal protected me from prison, but it didn't protect my assets. Jessica warned me, seizure order is signed, marshals arrive at 8 a.m. I slipped into the backyard and headed straight for the detached garage. Richard was a man of lazy habits, but 3 years ago he bought a massive tool chest. He told me it was for projects. Richard's only project was fraud. I let myself in. I pulled back the rubber mat under the chest. There it was, a small, circular floor safe. I knew about this safe because I paid the contractor who installed it. Richard thought he was being discreet. I just never told him I knew. I knelt on the cold concrete. The safe required a 6-digit code. I closed my eyes. What did Richard love most? The con. I typed in the date he incorporated Blue Horizon Holdings. The heavy steel door popped open. Inside, stacked in neat bricks, was cash. At least $250,000. Next to it was a pouch of loose diamonds. This wasn't just a rainy day fund. This was his get-out-of-jail kit. "Sorry, Richard," I whispered. "Severance package." I shoved the cash and diamonds into a duffel bag. But then I saw a manila envelope. I opened it. It was a second passport, for me. The name was Sarah Miller, and clipped to it was a one-way ticket to St. Kitts. He wasn't going to divorce me. He was going to force me to flee with him. He wanted to trap me in a foreign country where I'd be dependent on his stolen money. I shoved the passport into the bag. I stepped out of the garage. Dawn was coming. I reached the side gate. I paused. A black SUV with government plates turned onto the street. The marshals were early. I was trapped in my own backyard. If you've ever had to think your way out of a corner in 3 seconds flat, hit that like button. I looked at Mrs. Gable's fence. I sprinted across the lawn and threw the bag over into her hydrangeas. I scrambled over the trellis just as I heard the battering ram hit my front door. Crash! They were in. I lay in the flower bed panting. Then I crawled through the bushes to the alleyway. I walked 2 blocks to a diner and ordered coffee. The waitress looked at my torn leggings. "Rough night, honey?" "You have no idea," I said. I checked my phone. Text from Jessica. "Richard is singing like a canary. He's trying to pin the passport on you." "Let him sing," I typed. I hailed a cab. "The airport," I said. But as we merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed. An email from Richard. Time-stamped. Scheduled send. Subject: if you're reading this, I lost. "Sarah, you missed one thing. The diamonds in the safe? They aren't real. I sold the real ones 6 months ago. Good luck pawning glass." I froze. I pulled out a stone. It sparkled. But was it glass? Richard Conway. Even from jail, he was trying to get the last laugh. I started to laugh. He forgot one thing. I still had the cash. And I still had the Harry Winston necklace in the police evidence locker. "Nice try, Richard," I whispered. But checkmate is checkmate. My life as Mrs. Conway was over. My life as Sarah, the woman who beat the house, was just beginning. Richard is in prison, the feds have the house, and Sarah is disappearing with a bag of cash. Justice is served. If you loved this roller coaster, please like, subscribe, and share. And let me know in the comments, what would you do with $250,000 of stolen money? I sold the necklace for $200,000. But the real payday came when I visited Richard in prison and told him the truth about the diamonds. Sold to the lady in the front row for $215,000. The auctioneer's gavel slammed down with a sound that felt like closure. The room broke into polite applause. I sat in the back row wearing oversized sunglasses. I wasn't the buyer. I was the seller. And watching my grandmother's Harry Winston necklace disappear into the purse of a tech CEO's wife didn't feel like a loss. It felt like shedding a skin. $215,000. Legally mine, returned by the FBI after the case closed, cleaned of fingerprints and turned into liquid capital. It was the final brick in the new foundation I was building. It's been exactly 12 months since I crawled through Mrs. Gable's hydrangeas with a gym bag full of cash. A lot can happen in a year. Let's start with Richard, the mastermind. The government doesn't take kindly to people using their children's identities for money laundering. The plea deal he tried to cut fell apart when I handed over the digital logs proving he was the sole operator of the accounts. His immunity evaporated. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. Minimum security, sure, but for a man who considers 400 thread count sheets a human rights violation, it's hell on earth. Then there was Tiffany, the love of his life. She didn't go to jail. She turned state's witness faster than you can say plea bargain. She got probation and community service. Last I heard, she started a blog called Surviving the Narcissist, where she sells courses on how to spot red flags. The irony is thick enough to choke on, but hey, everyone has to make a living. And me? I didn't flee to St. Kitts. That would have made me a fugitive. I stayed right here. I used the immunity deal to clear my name. I used the rainy day cash, which, by the way, the IRS doesn't need to know about, to hire the best divorce attorney in the state. Since Richard was incarcerated and the assets were forfeited, the divorce was granted by default. I got full custody of Tyler. Tyler is thriving. We moved to a smaller house, a real home with no mortgage and no hidden cameras. But there was one loose end, one final question that had been nagging me since that morning in the cab. The email. The diamonds. Richard said they were fake. He said he sold the real ones to pay gambling debts. I needed to know. So, last Tuesday, I did something I promised myself I'd never do. I went to visit Richard. The visiting room was depressing. Gray walls and the smell of industrial cleaner masking the scent of despair. Richard walked in. He looked terrible. He'd lost 20 pounds. The arrogant swagger was gone. He sat down opposite me, picking up the phone receiver. "Feud," he said, his voice crackling. "I had to return something," I said flatly. "Return what? My dignity?" He tried to sneer. "No, I wanted to thank you. He frowned. Thank me? For the email I said? The one you scheduled, telling me the loose diamonds in the safe were fake. Richard's eyes lit up. A spark of the old, malicious Richard. Ah, yeah. I bet you felt pretty stupid carrying around a bag of glass, huh? Did you throw them in the river? He leaned in, eager for my humiliation. I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile. You know, Richard, I almost did throw them away. I was in that cab ready to toss them out the window. And then I remembered who I was dealing with. You're a liar, Richard. You lie when it helps you, and you lie when it hurts you. It's your default setting. I leaned closer to the glass. So I took them to a gemologist. I had them tested. Richard's smile faltered. They weren't glass, Richard. They were VVS1 Clarity, top grade, worth about $120,000. The color drained from his face. No, I told you they were fake, so you dumped them. I didn't want you to have them. I know, I said softly. You wanted to con me one last time from inside a cell. You wanted me to throw away a fortune just to spite you. But you forgot the first rule of the long game. Verify everything. Richard slammed his hand against the glass. The guard took a step forward. That's mine. That money is mine. Not anymore, I said. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And since you're in there, and the government seized the house, technically, those diamonds never existed. They were just debris. He was sputtering. I used the money to start a trust fund for Tyler, I lied. I actually used it to buy a beach condo in Florida, but he didn't need to know that. So, thank you. Your final lie actually secured your son's future. I hate you, he whispered. I don't hate you, Richard, I said, standing up. I don't feel anything for you. You're just a lesson I finally finished learning. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back as I walked out. I could hear him shouting, but it was just background noise. I walked out into the sunshine. The air was crisp. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Lunch at 1 area, I'm buying. I typed back. I'm buying. I just closed a big deal. As I walked to my car, a sensible, paid-off sedan, I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who signed papers without reading them. She was gone. In her place was someone who knew how to track a phone, how to crack a safe, and how to spot a liar from 4 miles away. Marriage is a contract. Business is a game. But survival? Survival is an art form. And looking at my bank balance, looking at my son's grades, looking at the peace and quiet of my new life, I'd say I created a masterpiece.
Some people get mad, some people get even. I got everything.
If you've stuck with me this long, thank you. You watched me go from a victim to a victor. But here's the thing about life. There's always another story. Always another secret behind a closed door. And if you think this is the craziest thing I've ever uncovered, just wait until you hear about my neighbor. Although, make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss what happens next.